I'm Sarah Kolis. Welcome to the Dressing Up podcast, where we talk about all things bridal dresses and general dressing up topics. I love to encourage women to dress up while expressing their personal style with confidence on how to do so. Visit sarahkolis.com to book a bridal alterations fitting, or even inquire about designing the custom couture bridal gown of your dreams. I am so excited to talk to you about this next topic. Let's get started. Hey, Emma, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. First question I want to ask you is, what is your favorite item in your closet right now?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think my favorite item is this like oversized corduroy button up that I thrifted a couple months ago. And it's like a maroon color, and I wear it like over the top of like every single outfit that I wear.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. So good. Love that. Okay, so I was a big knitter as a child, actually. I started very young. I don't do it as much anymore, but I did it like all the way up through college, and I kind of slowed down a bit to focus more on sewing specifically. But with my background, I have found that the fiber arts community contains some of the nicest and coolest people out there. So these were my idols during childhood, and today I'm so excited to get to interview such a person. Today we're here speaking with Emma, who started knitting in February 2021, which is shocking to me. It was not that long ago during the pandemic, and I am completely amazed by how far you've come in such a short amount of time. Emma's business is called Made in the Moment, in which she is a knit and crochet content creator and pattern designer, among other things. I've been following you on Instagram for a while, and I feel like we have a lot of the same values as people in general. So I was very drawn to that. But I like how you have the ability to communicate your thoughts and values with such clarity, honesty, and kindness. So I admire that greatly about you, and I'm so honored to have this conversation with you today.
I'm so honored that you asked me to come. I'm so excited to talk with you more.
Yes, thank you, Emma. So tell the audience more about who you are, what you do, what do you sell, and how did you get into all this?
Yeah, all great questions. So I am a kind of my first profession is I'm a musician. I actually just graduated with my master's degree in vocal pedagogy.
Yay!
Which,
Such an accomplishment.
yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
know. I know. Yeah, it was a long 2 years, but I'm super happy with all of that. I do like voice science stuff. I'm also a voice teacher, and I study opera. So that's everything that's encapsulated in that.
So
And
artistic.
I know, yeah. I love being able to kind of dip my finger into all of these different artistic ventures. So, the reason that I got into fiber arts is actually kind of because my main thing is very much performance focused and very much about like in-person interaction. So, during the pandemic, obviously, a lot of that was very highly like restricted or like not even available at all, especially at the beginning before we had any idea about like how things were transmitted. It was sort of just like, all right, everything's canceled, we can't do anything, figure it all out. So I took a gap year between my undergrad and my master's, and in that year I was planning on doing gigs and participating in choirs, teaching, all of that stuff, and I had all of these things lined up. But then the pandemic obviously put a little wrench in that. But I was nannying, and it was really fun, but it was also not super creatively fulfilling, like not surprisingly.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who I went to college with, who had a little crochet business. She made a lot of like keychains and earrings and headscarves and things like that. And I was talking with her one day, and she was like, I feel like you would be really good at crocheting, actually. So I just bought like a couple hooks. I bought like one skein of yarn, and I just, pulled up YouTube and started trying to figure it all out. So I started crocheting first. For the first like 6 months, I was pretty much just doing crochet, but I had a little bit of knitting experience from my grandma when I was like really young. And so then in like the fall of 2021 was actually when I started to knit. So it was a little bit after. But I think the reason that I have progressed so much is just because I was like obsessed with it. Like I needed the creative outlet,
Yeah.
and I needed to be good at it as quickly as I could.
Wow, you did it. I mean, so impressive. When I read that just recently, I'm like, February 2021, what?
Yeah.
So cool. And you're like already like you were doing patterns like super quickly.
Yeah. So my first pattern was in August of 2021, actually. The first one was, it was a tote bag. So it was like just a rectangle, but it had a graph design on it. So that was sort of the interesting aspect. And I wrote it because I was like, well, I made this thing. I think it's cool. Maybe someone else will like it. And I got an overwhelmingly positive response. And that really like encouraged me to want to keep learning and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people listening that don't knit or crochet, for her to make these patterns, it's an insane amount of math and figuring. Like, it is so impressive. One, it's impressive to follow, to be able to follow a pattern, but then to make one is like a huge, huge amount of talent to be able to do that. So
Thank
good
you.
job.
Yeah, I think part of it is just I like I said, I really wanted to make these things and I had ideas in my head. And so I spent a lot of time looking around and seeing how people wrote patterns and then just sort of following that, template to make my own. And it's hard, yeah, but it is really just you follow the steps, and if you write it in a way that people can understand and make it, then like that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something I'm going to say iconic about your style is that you are really good at making some really awesome motifs like cowboy hat, duck. Like, how do you choose which motifs you're going to do? I'm just curious.
That's such a great question. I have a running list. Some of it is like written down in my notes app, and some of it is just cycling through my head. But kind of whenever I see something that calls to me, or usually I have to like pull myself back because I have these grand ideas, and then I'm like, all right, I actually probably can't put that on a piece in a way that can be then like made by a bunch of people and like extrapolated upon. But yeah, I always have ideas and I'm always thinking of things. And the only thing that really holds me back is like having enough time to actually make them all. Um,
100%.
yeah, but I've always been really into like drawing and art as well. I did that a lot more when I was a kid and then in middle school. And then once I got to high school, I kind of had to choose between my interests, visual arts and like, sports. Those things sort of fell away and I really focused heavily on music. But now in my adulthood, when I have more time to try out all of my little things, it's been fun seeing how I can blend all of these things together.
Oh, yes. So cool. So, like, all about knitwear, what do you like to make? What fibers do you like to use? Like, what are some of your favorite stitches or favorite parts of making the garments?
I think that the thing that I like to make the most and the thing that I do make the most is vests, especially knit vests. I feel like right now I have them all like hung up and I have pretty much every length of crop that you could possibly want.
Yeah, all the options.
Exactly. Yeah. And it started off sort of as me not liking to make sleeves, not wanting to like have to go through the whole process of knitting a
Yes, those are
sleeve
hard.
because yeah, I find them pretty boring, honestly. But then also I realized that I just get more wear out of vests because I can wear them throughout the whole year and I can layer them more. So I really like that, ability with that. And I think the just like big blank space on the front of it and the like very rectangular shape of it gives
Hmm.
me a lot of like restrictions, I guess, in terms of the shape that then I'm able to have a lot of creative license and liberty within that single shape. So yeah, vests I think are the big thing right now. And I love wearing them. Those are like the things that I wear the most that I make.
And
Even
they're
though I
so
live
versatile too.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I live in New England, which we get pretty cold winters, but I don't have a car, so I walk everywhere in the winter. And honestly, like even when it's like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes I'm still like pulling off layers as I get to the
Yeah.
train because I walk really fast and I get very warm. So vests are always like a better option.
I
Um,
love that. Functional.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I can still wear them in the summer a lot of the time too, which is nice depending on how hot and humid it is. But in terms of fibers, that again kind of depends on like what season I'm trying to cater to. So I do use a lot of natural fibers these days. I'm very lucky that I'm able to like afford nicer quality fibers, and being a like knitwear content creator, I'm in a position where I have a lot of brands reaching out to me wanting me to like use their yarn for things. So I get sent a lot of free yarn too, which is
That's
nice.
awesome. So
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So I get to try out some really, really nice quality yarn. And I also love finding yarn secondhand. I don't honestly do a lot of yarn shopping these days because I feel like I have kind of everything that I need, at least for the moment.
Hmm.
But I love, going to thrift stores and digging around, finding things. eBay is great. There's a really nice secondhand yarn store in Boston that I go to.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm
Yeah.
not too picky about what I use, but I do tend towards wool and cotton and sometimes like acrylic blends or like mohair. So I'm sort of open to everything, but those are like I would say my big four.
So I'm sure a lot of our audience are not fiber artists. So I do want to just like educate a little bit. When we're talking about nice yarns, this stuff is not cheap.
Yeah.
So like, can you shed some light on like how much like a finished garment take, like how, like what type of costs are we looking at?
Sure. So let's say I'm making like maybe like a medium sized vest. So something that's not super cropped, but fits me kind of comfortably. If I were to make that with an acrylic yarn, which is on the cheaper end of this continuum of yarn costs, I would say I could probably make it for between like $3 and $6, depending on like that's kind of the lowest end of acrylic
Fibers.
yarn that you can get. Yeah. So that's like
Hmm.
a lot that you would find at like big box stores. On the higher end, I think the most you could easily spend like $100
Yeah.
on yarn.
Like that actually sounds like
That's like
cheap to
a
me.
lot.
I mean, and I haven't knitted in years. I used to love, I mean, I still would love it, but there's only 24 hours in the day. But I remember years ago, like one skein of yarn, like a really nice yarn, like you're talking, it could be $60 for a skein.
Yeah.
Like back then, I
Yeah.
remember. And if you're using, four skeins to make something, it adds
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. And I think that also sort of adds to why I got so into making vests as opposed to sweaters, because it
Yeah.
just is like a sweater quantity of yarn is so cost prohibitive, even if you are using stuff on the cheaper end. And especially if I'm finding things secondhand, it's really hard to find that quantity of yarn.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever get people asking you to make them the thing? And I know as an artist myself how that feels. And I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah. When I started out, I was really big on making things for people because I felt like it was really good practice for like making things in different sizes and practicing making a garment and then essentially giving it away for the price that I was asking for. As I started to get a little bit more refined in my like technique and started making projects that were just a lot bigger in scale, it really quickly became really hard to justify making things for free or making things for like any sort of price that felt like fair for what I was giving them.
Yeah.
So I do occasionally get people asking me to make things for them, but at this point I kind of just say like, oh, sorry, this is my job. I don't really have time to make extra things. But I will like offer to sell them something that I have already made if it
That
does
you've already
suit them.
completed. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot easier. Yeah, I know. These pieces that you're making, I mean, I can only imagine it takes so many hours. So even if you're getting minimum wage, like these garments are already a lot more expensive than what you can buy at stores. So there's all that, but they are made by hand and they're very fabulous pieces of wearable art.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky figuring out the prices of handmade garments because with fast fashion and with a lot of fashion anyway, even like more sustainable stuff, the value of clothing in people's minds has really like gone down.
Yeah.
And it's so much more about like quantity rather than quality. And even if you are having like high quality handmade pieces, it's tough for people to sometimes justify that price point in their mind.
I mean, I cannot agree with you any more on that for sure. I mean, I've been watching a lot of home shows lately, like home renovation shows. And like you have all these historic houses with all these teeny tiny closets. It's like you have this big master bedroom and then you have this teeny tiny closet. I mean, you can only imagine why they didn't have much clothes back then, but now we just like buy like crazy and want to fill up our closet and switch it out every single season. So yeah, that's something I'm trying to avoid myself personally and hopefully influence others in that way too.
It is really hard. The desire to like collect and get more and everything is really tricky. But yeah, that's something that I'm definitely like working on too and
Yeah,
trying not to buy new too much either.
exactly. Yes. Okay, this leads right into my next question. Does sustainable fashion exist?
I think if we are going based off of like the textbook definition of sustainable, I think that like it does exist, but it is in such a different scale than people can even imagine. I think the most sustainable options really are like as small as possible, like things that are made by one person and then, or like a very small team of people with a very small production line, everything is made to order, things like that. That to me
Mm,
is really the only way you can do sustainable fashion. And I know sustainable has been like such a buzzword the past few years that sometimes it feels hard to even really like pin it down and talk about it.
right.
But to me, any brand that's bigger than that, like it can't be self-sustaining in a way that is going to be good for like everybody involved in the process. And I'm sure there's some exceptions. Of course, I'm no like fashion industry expert,
Yeah,
but that's just sort of my inclination and my view of really like what is sustainable for everyone involved and like the resources that we have.
absolutely. I think I mean, you make a good point that maybe it's kind of like how you define the word sustainable. I mean, I suppose it could mean different things in different contexts.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think there's for sure like a sliding scale too of like everything isn't black and white. So there might be a brand or something that is using sustainable materials, but their like labor practices are not sustainable because they are like using people's time in a way that's not being compensated for. Or vice versa. Like there might be an ethical, sustainable labor force, but the material that they're using isn't going to either hold up or it's not very good for the environment.
yeah, completely. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different categories to make a not fast fashion item that's somewhat sustainable. I mean, there's so many categories. Like you have fiber content, labor practices, like wearability, versatility, sizing,
Yeah.
how long it will last, how many washes. Like there's so many things.
Yeah, there really are.
Yeah. It's hard to check all of those boxes. I get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
kind of why my I lean towards like there probably isn't that much really sustainable fashion in the way that like I think we want it to be when we're told it by brands.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about slow fashion. I feel like a lot of people don't know what slow fashion is. So let's hear your definition of it.
Yeah, I think slow fashion to me is based on the values of like quality over quantity and then trying to check some of these boxes that we just talked about of like having a garment that's made with really good fiber content, a really good material, something that's made like the name suggests, possibly more slowly and more thoughtfully and more carefully than fast fashion, and then wrapped up in slow fashion, I think, is the assumption that there are more ethical labor practices as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, literally, as the name suggests, slow fashion is made slowly. I have a thought for you. I've been, kind of out of the knitwear and crochet world for a little bit, and I saw some rumblings, and I didn't research it myself. I'm going to put this into context. I didn't research it myself, but because I have you on here and I really want to pick your brain, I want to know your thoughts on crochet fast fashion.
Yes, great question. There's a lot to unpack here. Do you have like was there a specific thing you saw, or have you just seen people sort of bring
Yeah.
it up?
So, I mean, I know this is like a juicy hot topic, and I'm sure the people listening to this are like, why is this a hot topic? They're like, why is Sarah being so weird about this? Yeah, like literally Target. Like I'm walking through Target and you see like these little crop tops that are crocheted, and I am wondering like who is making this? I mean, how?
Yeah, so for a little context, because like you said, a lot of people maybe are not familiar with fiber arts. Knitting can be done by machine. The process is slightly different than hand knitting, but crochet, there are no crochet machines. So any crochet that you see from like a small business all the way up to like fast fashion or even like designer crochet, everything has to be handmade. And I think where the problem comes in is that we don't know who's making these pieces, right? And we don't know how they're being paid. And I think it's very easy to boil the problem down to, well, the piece that is being sold in the store is not like they're not charging enough for that. So the people that are making it couldn't be making enough money. But I think it's a lot more complex than that because
100%.
obviously whoever is at the beginning of the production line is not even necessarily, their pay doesn't even necessarily correlate with how much the piece is being sold for. So where you see like at Target, there might be a crochet crop top being sold for $15. And I think that's really easy to see that, like, okay, for $15, this piece maybe, let's say, on the conservative end, took like 20 hours to make. So that person obviously is not making like a living wage for the amount of time they put into this. But then also, even on like a bigger scale,
That's 75 cents an hour if the
yeah,
person making it was making
was
that full
making
$15,
100% of that
which is not true.
price,
Yeah.
which obviously is not true because there's so many other people that have to be paid along the line. That's not accounting for like materials
Yeah.
and everything else. And crochet is like a pretty specialized skill. It's not like everyone can learn how to do it, I think, but it does take a lot of practice,
There's a lot of training. Yeah.
especially to be like fast enough to make things in like a production. Then on the other side of that, there are crochet pieces that are being sold for an amount that kind of does line up more with the amount of time that might go into making it. An example of this, and I just made a TikTok about this actually, but Kim Kardashian's brand Skims has a crochet like bikini line that they just released for the summer. And each piece, like the top and the bottom separately, is they're selling it for about $90. And from the looks of it, you could probably, those are probably like maybe 4 hours for each one. So that's a little bit closer to like, okay, if the person making it was the person that was getting paid $90 for that piece, that's getting closer to maybe an
Yeah.
amount. And I'm seeing you're doing the math.
22.50.
Yeah, so that's a little bit more reasonable, but
We're just
the
guessing
people
here. Yeah.
guessing on time and guessing
Yeah.
on like hours
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. But the people that are making it are not making $90 per piece that they make.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
I did a little bit of like research into the brand, and there's no
Ooh.
information on who is making it and where the factories are and what the production line
No
is.
country listed.
Not that I could find.
Ugh.
I know. Yeah. So I looked at the Good on You rating, which is a website that basically it rates brands based on sustainability, but also like transparency. So it's a really good reference point. And you can Google like Good on You and then a brand name, and it'll pop up with their rating. So for Skims specifically, since we're already talking about this as like a case study, their recommendation was like, we avoid this brand because there's no transparency about the like actual sustainability of the materials or the labor practices at all. And then I found an article that was talking about how the person who wrote the article looked into a little bit more of the manufacturer kind of line for Skims, and they have a lot of similar manufacturers to fast fashion companies. Like ASOS was one of the ones that I remember. So it's so confusing for the consumer because you see these pieces and you think, you know, if you're even just a little bit plugged into the online crochet community, you might think, oh, this actually seems like a pretty decent price for this like crochet piece. This must be fine, or it must be better for me to buy from here than like crochet from ASOS. When in reality, possibly, allegedly, I don't know, I'm not making any like statements for sure, but like it seems like they might be manufactured even in the same place by the same people.
And the only people making the additional money is the people up top.
Right.
Which is sad. Yeah. And this is wild too, because you and I, both people that are interested in this topic, even we can't find information on it. And in my opinion, brands that do have very ethical labor practices, like shout it to the rooftops, and they're going to have in there like made in USA or made in Italy or wherever, which a side note, I see very often, especially in bridal too, I see a lot of designed in Italy.
Oh.
Right? Tricky.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it was made there.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm really glad I picked your brain on that topic because that was so good.
Actually, I have one more thing to add about this that I think is interesting. I think it was about a year ago, I met with this like small sustainable underwear for men brand. So I met with their like lead designer because they were really interested in having a crochet like kind of crochet like Speedo bikini type
Sounds
underwear
fabulous.
to offer. Yeah, which is a great idea.
Yeah.
And they were asking me about like what my thoughts were on like, okay, like what sort of fabric would be best for us to use? Like how should we go about production? Like we really want to do this ethically. Like, would you be willing to make pieces? Like we'd love to commission you for that. And it was really kind of disappointing because as we went on, we kept coming across these barriers of like, well, no, I can't, me personally, I can't make 20 pairs of bikinis in a week. Like, I don't think I could
Yeah.
even ask like a bunch of friends to make all of that. Like, really, like coming down
hard.
to it, like, we can't pay you enough for this. I can't physically do this much labor that you want. And they were planning on like doing a quote unquote small drop, but they wanted like 500 pieces in like
Yeah.
2 months. And I was like, I hate to break it to you, but like, there's no way that you can do this unless you employ like 60 people.
Yeah.
There's no way that you're going to get this done ethically. And I think that was like a really big wake up call for me too, because I was like, I'm really seeing the numbers and the timeline laid out and seeing that like for what I would charge and like what I'm willing to work for, like it's not possible for them to make really any profit on this.
The numbers are just so hard. Like
Yeah.
to truly do this the way we would like things to be done, it's so hard. I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another. I like to think this is a hot topic too. I'm sure the people listening to this are just laughing because I hope this isn't going all over their heads. But I think about this a lot. I think about this a lot, especially as a business owner, where I do seamstress and sewing work, what the word handmade means, because I do think it means so many different things to so many different people. And I think people in our types of communities, like we know what we think we want that word to mean, but maybe that doesn't always, you know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is kind of a hot topic actually. And I'm not sure sort of how the conversation is around like seamstress stuff with knitting, especially because there are knitting machines. There's this interesting divide where some people get kind of a little like persnickety about people that use knitting machines because there's obviously like huge commercial factory knitting machines, but then there are also scaled down versions for like home use and then even smaller scaled down versions. There's one called, I think it's called like the LK 140 or something. And that's a pretty decently sized one. A lot of people use that to like make sweaters or like pillowcases and things like that. And then there's an even smaller version called the Centro, which is plastic basically and is like a hand crank and is very, very accessible. That's the kind of thing that you might see in like a Michael's and you might buy it for like a kid, but also you can make a lot of like really cool pieces on it. But I think this past Christmas, a lot of people got Centros for Christmas from family members, a lot of like knitting content creators, and they're started this whole discussion about like, well, you're not hand making it because you're not hand stitching every single stitch. And same thing with like the more industrial size knitting machines. And to that, I would say like I personally have never used either of those because I honestly like I don't really know how to. And I like the freedom of just being able to like do it myself. But I think that people forget that like just because you make some of the fabric with this machine doesn't mean that the machine is sewing it together. The machine is not like finishing all of the pieces. The machine is not like doing the sizing for you and like increasing and decreasing. And especially with the Centro, like you are hand cranking it. So like literally your hand is making all of the stitches come together. So I think it is kind of it's a tricky discussion, and it's one that has a lot of nuance, and that it can be really easy for people to get like superiority complexes because they're like, well, I would never use a knitting machine. All of my stuff is like really handmade, and those people are just cheating or whatever. Yeah, they're fake. They're not really hand making stuff. But I think really at the end of the day, like it all is handmade. And I don't know, even the definition of handmade is kind of tricky because even things made in a factory are like a lot of times like people's hands who put together a lot of the pieces.
I think I get hung up on this too, because I think part of my definition of handmade would be like that one person created it. Like I'll make a dress from start to finish, but my starting point is not me like raising an alpaca farm and like spinning my own yarns and making my own fabric. Like I'm not doing all that. I'm just starting from fabric that I purchased
Right.
I mean, to me that I still consider that handmade, but I'm only doing a part of the process. But so that's why it's tricky for me. It's tricky.
It is. I think the hard thing comes when you're trying to commodify the label of handmade. Like not you personally, but like people
Yeah.
people are trying to use that as a way to separate what they're doing from what other people are doing. Like, oh, my piece is better because it's like handmade versus that piece was not handmade. So like this is higher quality. Where I
Hmm.
think there's just the lines cross all over the place and it's so blurry and it's really hard to make that distinction. But I think the having the caveat of like one person is putting it all together does sort of help as like that is one definition and one way that you can
Yeah.
define it.
Do you know of any maybe like misunderstandings about the fiber arts community or about knitting, crocheting, handmade items? Anything you can think of that you hear out there that you want to clarify for our audience?
I think one of the big ones, and maybe this is not as popular anymore because of like all of the pandemic knitters, but I think when I started out, there was this huge like misconception that like, oh, only old people like knit and crochet.
Yes, good one, good one. I kind of forgot about that. So
Yeah.
true. Yes.
Yeah. And it's like, that's, everyone can do it and everyone does. And everyone, like, it's not just women, everyone in between and men and like everyone can and does want to. And there should be like space for them in the conversation and discussion about it.
I think that people that don't have like crafty hobbies like us don't understand the amount of time that goes into these projects, that like we make it look fast because we only show you the finished product and like how
Right.
amazing it is, but like we don't explain like all the labor that went behind it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. And even I underestimate myself sometimes. If I'm like making a dress, I'm like, oh, this is a quick one. It'll take me 4 hours and it takes me 8. So I'm like, whenever I estimate, I'm like, just double it. That's probably
Yeah.
more accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think another thing sort of in that vein is I think people think because knitting and crochet is a hobby for some people and it's something that they do on the side, even though it's something that I like to do and it is in a way my hobby, it's also my job. And like there are parts of it that are more like job like than the actual knitting and crochet part. But I
Hmm.
think for anyone that makes any knit crochet products to sell, there's that weird sense of like, well, you like doing it, so really you should charge
Or it's
less.
good practice, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Gosh, I
Yeah,
had a
it's
dime
so
every time I heard that
infuriating.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. I have just one more question. Your style is very unique and I love it. And like everything you wear, I expect you to wear it. And I love seeing the things you come up with. So, I mean, this is a topic that like I could dive really deep into, but what I want to talk about is just kind of like your advice on dressing up in general and like wanting to dress in a certain way that makes you happy versus trying to go with societal norms.
I think it's a great question, like for me specifically, because I feel like I have done a lot of work over the past like 3 years, especially really figuring out like what I like to wear in and what I like to wear outside of the context of like what I should be wearing. So I think part of that was actually during the pandemic, just having a second to like not get dressed every day and not have to get dressed up every day and having a little bit of time to think about, all right, like what do I want to be wearing? If I was going out right now, like what would I wear? And taking the time to actually look for style inspiration places and be a little bit more thoughtful about what I was wearing. And then also kind of within that, I got really into like shopping on Depop because I really missed thrifting. And so I would
Yeah.
like scroll through and be like, oh, I kind of like this. I kind of like this. And all of a sudden I had this like really big, nice, like visual curation of pieces that I liked and wanted to sort of move towards. And I didn't obviously like buy everything, but it was nice to have things sort of saved in a place where I was like, oh, I like that. I like this. And then trying things on and being like, okay, actually, I thought I would like that, but I really don't like how that makes me feel. And so within that, as well as sort of having a little bit of time to think more about like my gender and my sexuality and how that relates to like how I dress and how I present, I
Mhm.
felt a lot more like freedom to just choose pieces that I liked and wanted to wear, as opposed to like, this is what a woman who is like 22 years old and lives in this area of the world should wear to do this activity. I was kind of like, all right, I'm doing this. what level of fancy do I need to be? And then
Mhm.
what can I put together that is going to be appropriate for that? I think the past like year especially has just been really fun getting to try out a lot of different things and figure out like what silhouettes and cuts and crops that I like. And also, I make my own clothes. So I get to make things that I want to wear and that I like wearing and experiment also within that. I don't like everything that I make. I don't think it looks how I wanted it to in my head, but it's really fun to be able to experiment in that way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, gosh, people are, I think, so afraid to experiment. I mean, getting dressed up every day is like such a personal choice. And I mean, just wear what makes you happy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I think experimenting is so fun. Like, just try a different cut you've never tried before. I think a lot of people will choose what style of dress that they're going to have for their entire life in their early 20s and then don't really change at all, or even
Yeah.
change their haircut or change their
Yes.
makeup. Like, let's just change everything up and try new things and see what you like and don't like.
Yeah, and that was a big thing for me too. I mean, I in 2020 I had hair like down to my waist, just like long black hair. I had never done anything to it. And slowly I just started like chopping more of it off and
Yeah.
trying different things, dyeing different parts of it and
Uh-huh.
realizing that like it's going to grow back and it's going to be fine. And if I don't like something, I'll just dye it back or I'll
Yeah.
get a new haircut or something.
It can be
Um
changed.
yes, it's all everything is in flux. And yeah, in terms of like experimenting with outfits, I think it's really fun to find outfits that I put together and I like, but then later on I look back on them and go, I don't know if that was like, I don't know if I like that anymore. Like it's fun
Yeah.
to be able to see the change of like different choices
Yeah.
throughout.
Yeah. I feel like myself, I feel like I have different eras of my life with
Yeah.
how I dressed. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was my like crop top era. This was my like super ultra vintage era. This is my more refined era. Like it changes every several years, which I
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. And I think the fun part within that too is finding pieces that cross over in between the eras. That's been
Yeah.
like the most fun thing for me of like, okay, I have this like more like preppy era, but then how do I transition that into something that's a little bit more casual while still using the same pieces? Or how do I like combine these two different aesthetics and put them together into something that's like completely different from either one of those separately?
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, this has been fabulous. I just want to give you a big hug, which I
Yeah.
know we can't do. But seriously, I have enjoyed picking your brain so much because I mean, I could just go on and on. It's just amazing what you're doing. And I like what you're putting out into the world and just you being you. Just keep doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. This was so much fun. It's been really fun talking to you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so how can people connect with you? Instagram, what do we got? Let
Yeah,
us know.
Instagram and TikTok, both of them I'm made in the moment. And then I also have a YouTube channel that I am, kind of revamping now that I'm done with school. And those are the main ones. I also have like a Pinterest, but you know,
Yeah.
Instagram and TikTok, those are the big ones.
Made in the moment. Yes.
Yes.
Good. And well, thank you so much to our podcast listeners too. I think what I want to do here, Emma, if you're okay with it, for our YouTube watchers, if you wouldn't mind maybe just pulling a few pieces and just kind of showing us.
Oh, sure.
So if you
Yeah.
want to hop on YouTube and check this out, please do so.
I grabbed a couple favorites.
Oh, I love it. Okay, let's see. Tell us a little bit
So
about each one.
this
Oh, I
is
love that
my
one.
duck vest. This is
Yes.
like my favorite thing probably that I've ever made.
Oh,
I
so
just yeah,
good.
it's like the perfect fit, perfect cute little duck.
So ducks are my favorite animal, by the way.
Oh my God.
So I extra love that.
Yeah, it's really fun. I've loved all of the people that I've like connected with through this
Yeah.
the duck fest. There's a lot of people that have ducks as a favorite animal actually.
Yeah.
Okay, this next one is a little bit harder to see, but it is a set. So this is a little tiny crop
Okay.
top, and then these are shorts.
Oh my gosh. Knitted
So
shorts.
yeah, I need to make another pair of these. They were so fun to make.
Really? How do you feel wearing them?
They're really comfortable actually, and like
Yeah.
not they're not too warm. I thought they would be, but especially like paired, I think that's part of the reason why I made absolutely the tiniest possible little crop top you could imagine.
Just don't lift your arms too high.
Exactly. No, I had to make a bralette to wear underneath it because it like comes up.
Too high. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, I love this. And this yarn was from one of my like yarn friends that I connected with over Instagram who like sent this to me as to celebrate their launch of the yarn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it.
And then I have this button up, which
So
has
cute.
a lemon slice on the back, which I really like.
So this is crochet, everyone. So
oh yes, this is crochet. Those first two were knit.
yeah,
This one's crochet. You can see, well, I don't know if you can tell. The texture is very slightly different. And I used a thinner cotton yarn for this one. The
fabulous.
duck vest was actually, it's an acrylic wool blend. And then the knit set is 100% wool, which is like, you know, it's hot, but it's
Yeah,
it's not too bad. And then this one is like a cotton.
nice.
Really nice and like flowy. I really like this one too.
Emma, how do you wash these?
I hand wash everything.
Okay.
I know that you can put things into machines. Like a lot of people use garment bags, and you definitely can, just not like in the dryer. But
Mhm.
I don't have laundry at my apartment, like even on site. So I have to go to a laundromat.
Yeah.
And because I'm going to a laundromat, I'm just like I'm too scared that the machines are too powerful and that they're gonna absolutely like shred.
We don't want that.
Yeah. So I hand wash everything in like warm water with soap. Give them a nice soaking, like wring them out, rinse them out, and stuff like that, and it does the job.
And then like for drying, do you just like lay it on a towel and just
Yeah.
let it do its thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
If it's nice, I'll like lay it outside and then it dries faster. But you know, in the winter,
Yeah.
they would just like freeze solid. So
Oh man.
yeah. And then I have one more that I want to show.
Oh,
So
fabulous.
this is actually what I made as my first design. So this was my first like tote bag design. But
What?
I just recently redid it into a vest.
That was your first?
This was my first pattern.
How did you do that? Because like that's a circle. Like that's hard.
I had some help. The person I was dating at the time helped me like with a little bit of the like the drawing process for it. But
oh my gosh.
yeah, this is, and then on the back it says
so cool. Yes.
yes.
I
don't know
love
if I'm allowed
it.
to curse, but it says stop effing up the earth. I know it's
I
not
love it.
curse, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
I
so
love
those are
it.
some of my favorites.
Fashion with a message.
Yes, this was so
Yeah.
fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you so much, Emma. See ya. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode has allowed you to approach the world with greater confidence in your own personal style. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out through email or inquiry form on the website. I hope you are all ready to go and get dressed up. I look forward to sharing more dressing up tips with you in future episodes. See you there.